Please welcome Senator Rand Paul.
We have a $4 trillion government riddled with waste from top to bottom. In fact, I sent him a few suggestions. And so far I haven't heard back from him. I'm still waiting. But, you know, one of the suggestions was just don't rehire the people who retire. Government is so enormous that if you just don't rehire people, that's $6 billion a year. Well, he waited a year and a half after the sequester was passed to even get started doing that. He is doing that now, supposedly, but that would have been $9 billion had he just not rehired people. There's another $10 billion you can save just by saying, from now on, we're gonna have only competitive contracts. Now, you would scratch your head and you would think, well, surely the federal government awards its work according to competitive contracts. Well, they do and they don't. They make it a requirement that you pay a certain scale of wage. So if you're trying to build a federal road in Kentucky where I live, you've got to have Chicago union wages paid in Bowling Green, Kentucky. It's called prevailing wage or Davis-Bacon. So we've required this on federal contracts for years and years and decades, and it adds about 20 to 30% to the cost of every federal project. If you eliminate that and just say, we'll take the lowest bid, which is the way most of the rest of the world works and most of the rest of our economy works, you'd save about $10 billion. I had this debate one time with Senator Harkin on the floor, and Senator Harkin said, well, my goodness, we couldn't have quality products. We couldn't, how would things be safe if they weren't approved by the union and made with union labor? And it's like, what world are you living in? 95, maybe 99% of everything you buy right now is non-union labor. There are things that are made. There's some cars, a few cars, mostly from bankrupt car companies, but there are some things made with union labor. But the thing is for him to argue that you couldn't get safety or quality, there could be no human rights, no dignity in work if you didn't have unions, it's just absurd. That might have, you know, there was probably a need in 1910 or 1890 for better working conditions, but we've come a long way, and we've come so far that union wages actually prevent people from getting jobs and have made some of our industries non-competitive worldwide. We've lost those industries, steel industry, car industry. I gave the president a few other ideas. After I gave him those and he didn't listen, I decided that he needed to hear about some of the more absurd things that we're spending our money on. We spent $325,000 last year on a robotic squirrel. Scientists wanted to know whether a rattlesnake would strike a squirrel that wasn't wagging its tail. They couldn't find a squirrel. They couldn't find a squirrel to volunteer. So they had to build a robotic squirrel, and sure enough, a rattlesnake will bite the you-know-what out of a squirrel that's not wagging its tail. We spent $5 million studying the collective action of fish. I guess we're going to derive some ideas about democracy from fish. Or actually, I think they told me robotics, but I'm having trouble understanding that. 1.8 million roll-up beef jerky. We spent $7 billion in Homeland Security money that was basically just, you know, earmarks for people. We spent $8 million in Homeland Security in Fargo. Now, I've got nothing against Fargo, but if the terrorists get to Fargo, I think we're finished. We have an anti-terrorism center in Kentucky. I frankly think when the terrorists get to Kentucky, we're probably finished. Keene, New Hampshire spent $250 grand for a armored personnel carrier. They've had 2 murders in 15 years. And so far, the terrorists haven't attacked Keene, so you could argue, well, the armored personnel carrier is working. But armored personnel carrier that you drive around in a war you want to have in a town of 5,000 or 10,000 people, this is what's wrong with government. I'm not saying we shouldn't spend money to defend ourselves. New York is a target. Los Angeles is probably a target. DC is probably a target. We have to defend ourselves. But what happens, like everything else that's well-intentioned up here, they take money and then everybody wants some. Everybody wants a piece of the action. I think the state of Indiana had 7,000 earmark requests for Homeland Security money. They wanted money for the popcorn festival, the popcorn factory, the squealing pig festival. I mean, you name it, they want money for ridiculous items. They had, within the Homeland Security, I think this was in western Michigan, they spent $13,000 on 8 snow cone machines. So I asked the guy from FEMA the other day what you're going to, he says, well, there might be a heat wave and we might use the shaved ice to cool people down. The truth of the matter is, the reason they got the snow cone machines is, and it's like so many other ridiculous things in government, they put on these public awareness seminars to tell you how they're spending your money. And to entice kids off the street, they offer them free snow cones so they can tell them how great FEMA is. Well, spending money for public information to tell people about FEMA, we had the same situation in our town. We had money for stormwater drainage, and so I'm in Lions Club, and I knew the guy I was in charge of, and he's a good guy, but we had to come up with $3 million in a small community, and it was a lot of money, and so I said, well, what's the money going to be spent on? Are you going to be digging a lot of ditches to run off stormwater? And he says, well, half of it will be spent on pamphlets. I said, what? So we can tell you where we might be digging the ditches. You know, it's a public awareness campaign, and this is in a $4 trillion government from top to bottom. It's just riddled with waste. So I have one bill proposal, and I'm trying to get it through, and I have a chance on this, and that is to give federal employees bonuses on money saved. So if you're in charge of the Department of Energy, some department in the Department of Energy, and you're in charge of $12 million, if you'll save $1 million, I'll give you $10,000. You know, so I'd give significant bonuses based on finding savings. And I think all of a sudden you'd have people saying, oh, you know what, we really don't need that amount of money. Right now it's the opposite. If you work for the government and you're getting towards the end of the year and you have $1 million left in your budget, it's hurry up and spend it. Can't we get to Las Vegas soon enough, you know? Let's have a conference. So we certainly need a magician and a disappearing elephant. I mean, every government official should have that. And I think the IRS learned a lot by having the Star Trek, presentation. So we got to hurry up and spend it, and that's the way it goes. In the IRS, what's most infuriating about the IRS scandal is that, one, you shouldn't, when you lose an election, feel like that whoever wins the election gets to take all of the bully force of government and punish their enemies. I think there's something profoundly un-American about that. And I don't think whether you're Republican or Democrat, I think nobody thinks government should be used in that fashion. But we looked into it some, and we found out that maybe it's more than just a couple of rogue employees. The IRS union, the Treasury union, gives $1 million in the last 2 cycles to Democrats. They gave $20,000 to Republicans. And I haven't looked at the list, but I suspect that the Republicans they gave it to are the ones that really are Democrats. So they give all their money basically to Democrats. So do you think really there might be people over there at the IRS saying, let's look this one up on the computer and see what their donation history is and decide whether we want to audit them? We also found out, and this is Senator Coburn found this out, and his office does a great job finding waste. He found out that there's 200 IRS employees working for 6 months out of the year on union activities. Now, if you're in the AFL-CIO and you do union activities, usually the union pays you. Your company doesn't pay you while you're doing union activities. Not true for the government. You actually have designated time where you can work for the union, but you're still paid for by the taxpayer. Of the 200 employees, 40 of them make over $100,000 a year doing union work. So you wonder really if firing 1 or 2 IRS employees is going to change the culture. If you look at the public unions for all of government, in the last election cycle, they gave $30 million to Democrats and $200,000 to Republicans. So really, your government that you're paying for is not only writing all these onerous rules that obstruct business and hamper the economy, you're also paying people who are then contributing to get more of that government, to get higher wages. So how can you really negotiate wages with government employees when there is no adversary? The people that they're negotiating with, who they've hired to their government, are on the same side because they've bought and paid for them with contributions. So really, I think there probably should be some limits. While most conservatives are not for campaign finance reform, I think there might be some that might work. I frankly think if you do business with government, whether it's big business getting $1 million contracts as a contractor or a union, that maybe part of the arrangement should be that you don't give. And it wouldn't be a prevention of giving. What it would be is a contract. You sign and you say, I'm going to take this government contract, but in doing so, I'm going to voluntarily accept restrictions on my giving, because I think on both sides, really, some of these are Republicans too, and the unions are Democrats, really we're influencing government by getting government money and using that government money then to influence government, and I don't think that's a good idea. There's a lot of bad news up here. There's a lot of things that need to change. But the good news, I would tell you, is you live in the greatest country and probably the greatest civilization ever known to man. We've created more wealth in this country, but also as a consequence, we've created more charitable giving. We give away $300 billion a year. So there is no richer country, but there's no more generous country. In order to preserve that, you have to believe in what your country stands for, believe in the founding documents, believe that making a profit is good for the country and good for all people, and believe that private property and the preservation of that is how we got here. And I think if you do that, there's so much greatness left in our country. We'll survive maybe 8 years of terrible government. And you also have, some people up here trying to stop the bad things that are happening. So we can get through all of that. But remember the good things about our country, remember its greatness, and be part of the next generation that will retain and regain that greatness again.
Thank you, Senator Rand Paul.
Thank you.